Fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Karen Hardy, and welcome to Flip This Risk podcast, where we interview high achievers about their relationship with risk taking and how it influences their leadership abilities. You can check us out at flipthisriskpodcast.com for more information. And today, I'm very excited to have with me Candace Wright and Greta Goodwin, who's going to talk about, I think, a very fascinating area of risk: facial recognition technology. I know that the first thing you're probably thinking about is Tom Cruise and James Bond. So it's going to put some things into perspective in terms of why this risk is so important. Why is government taking a leadership role in adopting this type of risk and technology? And what does the future look like in terms of organizations trying to prioritize their risk and make this one of the high priorities within this organization? So Candace and Greta, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I saw the report briefly about what GAO put out on this facial recognition technology report. And I thought it was fascinating that there's a suite of agencies actually tapping into this technology. So government is taking a leading role, and it's good to see that they're taking a leading role in this adoption of the technology. But in the grand scheme of things, what exactly is facial recognition technology?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question to get us started, Karen. So facial recognition is really a type of biometric technology. This is something that GAO has actually been looking at for several years. Our earlier work in this area has looked at its use by federal law enforcement, at ports of entry, and also in commercial settings. So when we talk about facial recognition in the context of our most recent report, what it's really looking at is technologies that can mimic how people identify or verify others, such as by examining their faces. And it takes into account biological characteristics, so skin color, how far or wide your eyes might be set, but also behavioral characteristics as well, like fatigue or emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you mentioned skin color, and I couldn't help but start. The first thing that came to my mind is diversity. So is diversity a component of this facial recognition technology now or in the future?
Well, it certainly will be an important element because the way the technology works is that it uses a photo or it uses a still from a video feed of a person, and it then converts that into a template that is actually a mathematical representation of the photo. And so a matching algorithm can then compare the template to another photo in order to calculate its similarity. So when you're talking about conducting facial recognition searches, one of the key things is whether or not that mathematical representation and the algorithms that support it will be able to identify if there is a match. And one of the things that's certainly been widely reported is that there can be some equity issues with regard to how the accuracy of the technology and its ability to have those accurate matches. Certainly, groups like Women of Color have been cited as an example where there are some challenges with the accuracy of the technology matching.
Yeah, I can only imagine that long term, that would be a discussion about in terms of ensuring this equity when it comes to actually using this technology. But it sounds so far reaching to me. It sounds like something, a heavy lift, of course, and that's something that government can do. But is this something that we will find more being used in the private industry, and even for small businesses and small companies?
Certainly. So this technology has been around for quite some time. However, there have been a lot of recent technological advances that have strengthened the accuracy or improved the accuracy, I should say, of the matching. And so we're certainly seeing an expanded use in various sectors, both government and commercial, in terms of how the technology is being deployed to use it to identify or verify individuals. And actually, I'm going to pause here because I think Greta has probably a really good example, just going back to some of the equity issues that we were talking about with regard to accuracy. She has some good examples from her recent work that she can point to on this issue. Greta, is it okay if I kick over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Candace. So Karen, as Candace mentioned earlier, we have a number of reports on facial recognition technology. And in addition to the one we just issued on federal agencies' use, we also issued one on law enforcement's use, federal law enforcement's use. And one of the main concerns that came out of that report and that we talk about quite a bit are concerns around accuracy and what it means when someone might be misidentified. So as you can imagine, there could be some very severe adverse things that come up if you are misidentified in a facial recognition search. And there's a number of research out there that talks about the concerns around people of color, the concerns around women, the concerns around misidentifying someone even with a disability. So if someone's misidentified, the inaccuracy of that can cause some pretty severe problems for them. And we had a testimony back in July where one of the witnesses for that testimony was a gentleman who had indeed been misidentified by the technology and ended up spending, more than, any time that he spent in jail was a problem. But the fact that, the technology misidentified him, and it took a while for that to get all sorted out. So inaccuracy is a major concern with the facial recognition technology that we're seeing.
It's interesting. I started to think about identity theft. I see you have this gentleman who's testifying and being, accused of something of someone that he was not, based on the technology itself. So apparently there's a lot of advantages to the technology, but of course there's always some disadvantages, some of the things you just pinpointed. What are some of the things that we get that's positive and this an advantage of actually using this technology? It seems to be a sign of the times.
Certainly. So, I would say with regard to the technology, it has a wide range of purposes. And like with everything, there can be pros and cons, there are trade-offs, there are these different benefits. And I think one really good example that I can point to is, with the work that we did looking at the 24 largest agencies and their use of the technology, we saw that a number of them were actually using it quite extensively to facilitate access to unlocking smart devices. So whether that might be your smartphone or a tablet, and I think for many people who struggle, like myself, with trying to remember passwords and, different logins,
yes,
certainly being able to use, an image to recognize you, to say, yes, this person is authorized to, unlock a device, let's say, that can certainly be a benefit. And I, certainly know lots of people on their smartphones, have that technology. And that's one of the ways in which federal agencies were using it, to allow employees who have been provided these devices to conduct their work at their agencies, to be able to unlock it. We also saw instances where agencies like Social Security Administration and the General Services Administration were also testing the technology as a way to allow people to gain access to log into various websites where they may need to, get access to, various agency services, let's say. And so this is something that we saw, with agencies testing the technology to see if they could use it as a way for, the general public to be able to access that government agency's website. That's something that's still in testing, and they're continuing to test and evaluate whether it will be deployed. But again, certainly another way that it is being used. And then I would also just highlight that there are agencies like the State Department, for example, who are using the technologies, are using facial recognition technology systems, as a way to facilitate information gathering, to evaluate and consider, applications for visas or for U.S. passports as well. So they may be able to look at that using those systems to be able to determine, whether or not somebody is, legitimately applying for a visa, they are who they say they are, and be able to even maybe, minimize the potential for fraudulent activity, especially by bad actors who might be seeking to get, a U.S. visa or passport.
Well, I can see how this can be used, FRT, if I may, can be used as a service that's offered by government to make the lives of citizens much better, much easier, and things like that. On the law enforcement side, Greta, what are you seeing in terms of how FRT is being used as a benefit for law enforcement, separate from the incident that happened with the gentleman?
Absolutely. So FRT is being used and has been really helpful in criminal investigations for law enforcement. FRT the accuracy is getting better, but as a general rule, it's been used and it's been very helpful with criminal investigations. It's also been used to help people to help agencies manage their program requirements. For example, we had a case in our report where the U.S. courts was using it to help the relationship and help ensure that people were, you know, meeting with their probation or pretrial services and officers. They were doing it, you know, because it was COVID, it was just easier to use FRT to unlock, you know, the system so that they could have, you know, they could interact with the officers or, you know, get their pretrial or probation services that they needed.
So
And
I can see.
Okay,
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
one more thing, also, what we also found was that there were also times where it was used for surveillance. You know, if you have someone who, you know, looks suspicious and you kind of want to know like what's going on, you know, the law enforcement were using it for surveillance as well. And then during two incidents around the time of the protest after the death of Mr. Floyd, the law enforcement agencies were using it if they saw someone who were, you know, committing damage or something to the property. And so they were using FRT to help identify individuals then. And then after the January 6th attacks, there were tip lines and everything set up in case folks had gotten images that they could put into a database so that law enforcement could help identify folks then as well.
So how can the regular citizen, and maybe Candace, you can answer this question, how can a regular citizen feel that this is something being done for me rather than something that would be used against me?
Well, that's a really interesting question and certainly a very good question, particularly as we think about the ways in which people are posting, you know, photos, for example, all over open source sites such as, you know, social media. And so there's certainly, you know, concerns by, you know, various members of Congress as well as advocacy groups, you know, about the ways in which this information might be collected and used. Again, I think there can be some, you know, benefits as we talked about earlier, but there's also, you know, the need to manage the risks of how the information is being collected, how it's being stored, the purposes for which it's being used. And so I think this is something that we'll continue to explore, you know, in future work.
So with the cyber attacks, you heard about the ransomware and all these other huge challenges in the technology area. Is cyber attacks, of course, nothing's off the table when it comes to the risks associated with using any type of technology. What do you think the most vulnerable area for the FRT, facial recognition technology is, or could be in the future?
Well, we didn't, for the work that we just recently completed, we didn't look at it specifically in the context of cybersecurity risk, but I can say, you know, as Greta and I have talked about, you know, there's a need to make sure that the way in which the system is being used is consistent with the authorities that the agencies have, as well as just to ensure, you know, these issues around accuracy as well, right? Making sure that the algorithms are going to have, you know, accurate matching capabilities to try to minimize, or, you know, if not avoid, then at least certainly minimize the potential for misidentification. And then there's also certainly the need to be mindful of, you know, what are the redress procedures, if you will, if somebody is misidentified. And I think, you know, those will be some of the kinds of things that we'll continue to look at as we explore the use of the technology by federal agencies.
Is there an ethics council or a governing body around this technology as you begin to grow it and expand over time that you and both Greta and Candace are involved in, or even envision?
I'm not aware of an existing government body. That's not to say that one doesn't exist. I'm just not aware of that, you know, based on what we found in our work. But certainly I think there is a continuing, you know, desire to understand how agencies are using the technology. Is it consistent with their authorities? Is it consistent with the values that we have as a country, right? And then also just sort of thinking through, you know, what might be the benefits of using it, but where might be some of the risks, and then how do you try to manage some of those risks?
And I'm assuming there'll be external partnerships, right, Greta? Go ahead with your thoughts.
Yeah, there will be. And I will also just like to add that there are a couple of laws that kind of govern some of this. There's the Privacy Act. And so there the Privacy Information Assessment, otherwise known as the PIAs, and the Systems of Record Notice, otherwise known as the SORN. And so the PIAs, the Privacy Impact Assessments, the PIAs, are basically, they help explain, you know, federal agencies have to submit this information, and where they explain kind of the uses of, you know, how they're going to handle this information, how they're going to maintain the privacy around that. And then for the SORNs, the systems of record notice, anytime there's a change to the technology, the agencies have to submit that to make that public. That also helps explain how that technology is going to be used. When we did the law enforcement FRT work, we looked at government, federal agencies, FRTs, and as well as private FRT systems. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we found that, for the private agencies that have FRT aren't really bound by the PIAs and the SORNs, the Privacy Act and the E-Government Act. So those have been a bit of a challenge. So I would imagine that there will be some councils, or there are a lot of people, aside from GAO, who are thinking about ways to kind of manage and mitigate those risks.
So is this something that's growing outside of government as well? Private industry is involved in this technology as well. Is government just, as you said before, Candace, this has been out for some time. Are there more players involved in this technological development?
Well, we certainly know that it's being used across government and commercial sectors. And, I'll just highlight that, in the work that we recently conducted, we certainly saw where agencies were actually using databases of commercially owned facial recognition systems. And so you have companies who are amassing, images of people that then they may, provide or make available to federal agencies to use in the conduct of their work.
Awesome. So what's the message to people? One, what's the message, if you had one message to give to regular everyday folks about a facial recognition technology, what would it be? And then what would your simple message be to leaders of organizations who need to think about this type of technology and the risks that they manage?
Well, I think for the everyday person, it's important that they recognize that this technology is being used, and it is being used in a variety of different ways. I think that's really important, and it should really inform the ways in which people share images, through photos, example on social media, should really inform, how they're thinking about how those images are being stored or being shared, I should say, because then, they could be collected and used in various ways. And so I think that that's really important, regardless of whether we're talking about facial recognition technologies, which is people should be mindful of regardless. And then I think for, federal agencies, I'll just note here that GAO has extensive work, where we see that the federal agencies can encounter a variety of risks in executing and conducting their programs and operations. So whether that's fraud, waste, and abuse, whether it's inefficiencies, whether it's mismanagement. And so those things really need to be at the forefront of agencies' minds as they're thinking about either adopting this technology or expanding the use of the technology, really focusing on, what's the intended purpose, who can access this information, what safeguards need to be in place around how it's shared, how it's accessed. I think those are really important things. How long are these images stored for? How are they disposed of? These are some really important things that federal agencies will need to consider as they further examine use of the technology. And I would say that it's also equally important to think about issues around public trust and whether the technology is being used, in a manner consistent with our values, thinking about the legality of it, the issues of equity and those sorts of things.
The public trust, Greta, the first thing I think about is law enforcement and how you have to bring social advocates to the table. Is that what you're seeing happen, or something that we will be seeing?
We see that there is an appetite for that. So I would imagine that will be happening soon, or, soon to come. And another thing I will just add, that Candace has said, completely agree with everything. The technology doesn't seem to be going away, and its use is only getting stronger. Its capabilities are only getting stronger. And so one of the things that we talk about in the law enforcement FRT report is that if law enforcement agencies are going to continue to use this technology, and we think that they are, then it's going to be really important that they ensure that the appropriate protections are in place around accuracy and also around privacy.
Excellent. That's good information for people to understand and to know, because everyone is not comfortable with technology, and to think that it's getting more personal in terms of facial recognition. As I said before, we've seen the movies with Tom Cruise and James Bond, and now it's here. It's a reality for all of us, and we need to understand the technology and how it could be a benefit both benefit us and to help mitigate certain types of risk out there that to protect us. On any last minute thoughts that you want to add to our audience, especially where they can get additional information?
Well, we certainly have quite a number of reports on our website at gao.gov. So I would encourage people, if they're interested in learning more about the use of the technology, especially as part of federal programs and operations, certainly to take a look there. And again, I just can't underscore enough what Greta said. The technology is here to stay. It will only continue to advance, build on the advancements that we've seen over the years. So really will be important for us to continue, collectively as a society to make sure we have a good understanding of the ways in which that it's being used and also the potential for misuse. Certainly the recent work that we did gave a comprehensive look. It gave a comprehensive lay of the land about how agencies are using the technology. We looked at 24 agencies, we surveyed 24 agencies and got some really rich information. And I think, by looking at the reports, people will get a sense of the range of ways in which agencies are using it. But also too, as I mentioned, really just being mindful, for federal leaders, to really think about, the ways in which the technology is being used and how to mitigate some of those risks that we've talked about.
Absolutely. Even with the small businesses outside of government, I like the fact that it's a technologies that can be used across different industries and that there's a long tail when it comes to best practices and lessons to be learned across these different agencies and companies to get on board with this. So listen, Greta and Candace, I want to thank you for being a guest on Flip This Risk podcast today. And I want to thank my entire audience and followers for watching and listening today. And I'm Dr. Karen Hardy. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome.